You're listening to the Friday Sports Show on Salford City Radio 94.4 FM with your host Jimmy Petruzzi, bringing you news from the local area and around the world. And we're very fortunate in this show to have interviewed some of the world's best athletes, sports people, footballers. We also speak to people who are aspiring to fulfill their potential. We speak to athletes at different levels. We also have a segment on the show. We speak to some of the world's most influential people in the field of psychology and related fields, giving us an interesting insight into their research and their perception and perspective on the field of psychology and related fields. Today we've got an interesting guest, a fantastic guest who's going to share an insight into what it's like to compete at the high level and train to get there, and just give us some general insights what it's like to compete at a very high level, international level. She is amongst the most promising rowers in the UK, and also won the World Cup gold at junior and under 23 level. She's a full-time athlete at British Rowing. Jess Leyden, welcome to the show. Great to have you on board.
Hi, great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Great to have you on board, Jess. I suppose where we begin is the beginning, Jess. What sort of got you into rowing? How did you sort of fall into rowing?
Well, I grew up in Todmorden, and the local rowing club came into my school. It was part of a project that set up by British Rowing that would give equipment and money to local rowing clubs if they managed to get local schools involved in rowing. Mm-hmm. So I also got kicked off my horse and broke my arm at the same time, and didn't want to do physio because that hurt and was boring. So yeah. My mum also sent me down there to try and straighten my arm, but it didn't work.
No, it's really interesting stuff. And in terms of the rowing, and so it was a local rowing club that sort of got in touch. That's really interesting to see that the talent ID is out there.
Yeah, it was Hollingworth Lake Rowing Club. They're an awesome little club. They've actually had like a lot of success from like individual athletes, but from such a small club in the north is quite unusual. But they're just so friendly, and a group just all volunteers, no paid coaches, just doing it for the love of the sport.
Absolutely, Hollingworth Lake, I know it well. I walk around there pretty much every day, so yeah, absolutely, yeah. Fantastic place. So that's really interesting. It's great stuff. And how did it feel, for you to be sort of identified as a potential athlete at the time? Jess, what must have been a bit of a buzz for you?
I wasn't really. So the school kind of put on a minibus that would take us half an hour to the lake, do a bit of rowing for a couple of hours, and half an hour back. And there was only kind of 2 of us that wanted to do it, so wow. It was a bit over-egged. But I was kind of just the one that kind of stuck around. I definitely wasn't talented at that point. I just got hooked on it, really. I just wanted to keep going, so I just kept. My mum took me when the kind of program finished, and I met my first coach, Ian John, who took me all the way to the team. It was real fluke, really. Yeah, I mean, obviously you sort of, you've got the ability, the talent, and I think it's great to see that the talent ID programs are running, because obviously it sort of gets people involved like yourself, and that's, I think it's a really, really important thing that sort of carries on, and they sort of keep going with that, all sports really. At what point did you think you had something sort of, Jess, at what point did you think, well, I can actually make it here to the highest level? Was there sort of a point where it clicked and you thought, yeah, I've got this? I was a bit weird. I didn't ever want to be called an athlete or anything. It was only when I was like getting paid for it full time that I'd allow anyone to call me an athlete, because I was like, okay, I can't deny it anymore. I kind of just saw myself as like doing my hobby, but I think I mean, as a junior, I was just in my single most of the time, and my first national competition was junior 14 single sculls, and we just thought, we'll go along and see how we do, and I managed to win it by like a long way, and wow. I think that was the point where I was like, okay, because I kind of lost like on the sprint races all the time. For like a year, and then I did head races in the winter, and I got a couple of wins. So then we went to the nationals, and I think that was probably the first time I was like, I really like this.
Brilliant. Yeah, no, that's Fantastic.
I think I could keep going.
Absolutely. I can imagine single sculls, and I suppose for our listeners and in sort of general, what's it like competing in single sculls, Jess? It must be sort of, you're out there, you're on your own there, and in one sense. And what's it like competing as a single scull rower?
Yeah, well, at that age, I didn't really know anything different because there wasn't really anyone else my age that to compete with. I did a couple of doubles with my friend Ashley, but at that point, I was just always in my single. But I really love the competition because it's just like you just make all the decisions for yourself. Nothing's really planned. Like when you're in a crew boat, you kind of have to have a bit of a plan and stick to it because everyone has to know what we're doing, and you're out of breath trying to pull yourself down the course. You're not going to change the plan very easily on the hoof, other than go. But in singles, it's just like a lot more maybe mind games, like trusting yourself. It's a longer race, and it's utmost respect for all of your competitors all the time because it's just you. You've got no excuses. You're just one-on-one, and if they're faster than you, then I know how hard I've trained, so hats off to them kind of thing. So I really loved that aspect.
But is there a tactical thing, Jess? Do you sort of just go out there and just row as fast as you can, or do you sort of have like a tactical? Obviously, you might not probably want to share too much or give too much away, but
I think it's a lot less tactics than any other sport probably because you have your own lane. You're not affected really by anyone affecting your race. You've just got to get from A to B as fast as possible. But I think psychologically you can have a lot of not necessarily tactics because you are just trying to go as fast as you can, but it can affect you a lot more than people realise because if you're out in front, you're looking at the whole field and you can see what's happening because we're going backwards, unlike other sports where if you're in front you can't see what's going on behind you. So that's why you kind of sprint out of the start to try and get an advantage. But then obviously you've created all that lactic acid in your muscles. Absolutely. And then you've got to go into endurance with the build-up of lactic acid. And then at the end you've got to defend, if you're in front, your position, putting even more lactic acid in you. So I think that's where the mind games help if you're in front, and also if you're in front and someone's coming through you, and if mentally you can't do much more to hold them off, then that's also tactics. So,
absolutely, I mean, it seems to me there's sort of I suppose there's different ways you can sort of, not that I'm sort of an expert in rowing by any stretch of the imagination, but I kind of think when I'm watching, you're either, if you're the best in the field, you're the fastest, you go out there and you put a marker down. But then in saying that, there's the other side, like you said, the lactic, and you just see sometimes like a boat will just hang behind in second, third, and just leave it to the last 200 meters where they really, go for it. But I suppose that's sort of, is that something you talk to coaches about, how you're gonna sort of row your race, or I'm sure, I would think, is that like a discussion that you have with coaches, how you're going to go about executing the row?
100%, because you've got to try different things and you've got to work out like your physiology of each person, like where is that going to come into effect. So like for me, I've got more anaerobic capacity, so I'd maybe save a bit more through the middle so then I could really bring the speed at the end, whereas if I'd gone a bit harder into my aerobic, then I wouldn't have as much of an effect when I bring my anaerobic to the table. So it's just like it's honestly just how fast can you get from A to B with yourself, but then again you've also got the effect of what everyone else is doing, which you haven't really got much control over. Yeah,
because I suppose at your level there's going to be people who are very, very close in terms of abilities. It's just that sort of split second here and there, and obviously it's a little bit different in terms of if you're sort of competing against someone who, from a recreational point of view, there's different levels, but where you are, the higher up you go, I suppose, the closer the field is as well. So I suppose there's a tactical side. But in terms of training, Jess, what's training like? I'm sure it's different when you're competing, and it's periodization and so on and so forth. But generally speaking, what sort of training like for a rower? What sort of training do you guys do?
So we're kind of jack of all trades, master of none when it comes to training, because we've got to do both the power sprint and the aerobic. Mm-hmm. And when you train one, it diminishes the effect of the other. So you've constantly got to balance doing weights with doing aerobic long distance training, because when you do the aerobic long distance, it takes away from the gym work you've done. So we're just constantly trying to balance and optimize both aspects. So we do on the water, just steady state. We also do pieces on the water, and on the ergo, that helps us give us numbers to see where our physiology is.
Wow.
Taking away the effects of watering conditions on the row machine, but then also we do a lot of weights and trying to keep agility in there with cross training. When
you say weights, do you like things like Olympic lifting and stuff like that, or just?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. So we do all Olympic bars, free weights.
Yeah, and what about in terms of, say, injury prevention? Do you do other stuff around that as well, or in terms of, because I could imagine with sort of rowing, you're using, every muscle in your body pretty much in some respects. Do you guys do sort of work around that as well, or?
Yeah, we target all of the body, but most people think we use our arms a lot, but it's actually 70-odd% leg driven, the stroke and hips. So we've got to have really strong legs, really strong hips, and then a really good core and trunk, because you've got to transfer all that power into the blade that you're holding onto with your arms. So it's you've got to make sure the whole chain is strong and transferring whatever you're producing from which body part to the end of the spoon.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I mean, years ago, we'll still do now, I guess, whenever sort of I work with, footballs, for example, I always recommend they do rowing, even the rowing machine, in terms of just because of the power you've got to generate from, like you said, the legs and so on and so forth. But there's also non-impact on the joints, so to speak. So it's just something to do, little competitions. Do you use those rowers as well? Do you use the rowers you get in gyms? Jess, do you just
Yeah, we use them a lot. The Concept 2s.
That's the one. Yeah.
Yeah, we do. We even do testing on there. So we have 2K ergo tests where we compare against each other, and we do 30-minute pieces and 5K tests in the winter.
That's really interesting stuff. And I remember sort of doing these little competitions, in terms of 1 minute row, what you can get, and 5,000 minute row, just sort of, that sort of stuff. But yeah, that sounds really interesting. And that, I suppose that gets all monitored as well.
Yeah, definitely. And when we're doing UT2 ergos, which is just steady state, we've got to keep our lactic acid in our blood at a certain range, because if you're constantly training in the wrong training zone,
of course,
you're not going to be getting the most out of your training. So
before
COVID, we'd have blood taken from our ears nearly all the time. Our earlobes would be numb from all this.
You have to check the lactic. That's really interesting. I wonder with that, obviously, sort of training is a big thing. I suppose genetic training, both variables, all sort of in terms of how you can, buffer that as well. But I'm just sort of wondering, so with yourself, when you got into rowing, did you sort of think of other sports too? I can imagine that, the base you've got for rowing would translate itself, or did you think, what, I'm going to sort of just focus on rowing? Do you ever sort of, when you first started out, think of other sports too?
So I've been horse riding since I was 3, but I was just so uncompetitive. I just wanted to go fast rather than be competitive. So we tried. I just did a bit of everything, nothing very high level. But I was really uncompetitive. I did a bit of triathlon with my pony club, and I was my friend was really good at triathlon, and one time I caught her up on a run, and I was like, I'm just going to stay behind her, because if she sees that I'm overtaking her, she's going to have a really bad day. So
yeah.
Definitely didn't have the competitive streak that rowing had brought out of me.
Wow,
Yes.
Now, and in terms of yourself, I mean, what are the highlights of your rowing career thus far? What would you say for you? What sort of stands out for you at the moment? I know you've obviously got many years ahead of you, but what would you say so far has been your highlights?
I think winning the Junior World Championships in the single was massive for me. It was just like a thing I've set my mind on doing for the year, and I just trained every day, with everything I could do. With my coach, just in at Hollingworth Lake, we did it all there, preparing there, and it was just awesome to achieve that. And then probably qualifying the quad for Tokyo, which we did in 2019, was big for me, because I really invested everything I had since I've been in the boat since 2015. So that was a real highlight, achieving that.
I can imagine. When you won the gold at sort of junior level, what was the field like, Jess? I mean, obviously, you sort of focus on your own ability, but do you sort of keep an eye on the field in terms of the other competitors, where they go and that sort of stuff, or you just sort of focus primarily on your own career?
People are so different. Like, a lot of people do follow each other and check up, but I never do, because I just like to, a race is a race. It doesn't matter what people have done before or after, or I just like to race whoever's there. But you see people, I've raced a few times against one of the girls that came second to me at juniors in the single, and so you definitely, we all grow up together, but I don't necessarily keep tabs on what people are doing every year.
Absolutely, for sure. You've got enough to focus on with yourself. And in terms of you strike as the sort of person just who sort of takes things in their stride to a point, but I'm sure there is a very competitive side for you to have got as far as you have. And do you train mentally as well? Is it something that you do in terms of doing mental training, mental skills training?
So I got COVID in January this year, and it completely wiped me out. It was really bad. But even during that period where I couldn't exercise at all, I worked on my visualization and trying to keep myself in the boat, through visualization and things I wanted to work on, because obviously I had been out of the boat for so long. I just wanted to keep my hand in and keep all of that going. So definitely, and did a lot of meditation and try to train my brain to be able to block certain things out whilst focusing on healing my body as well. I definitely tried a bit of that, which I really enjoyed, just going into a completely different field that I hadn't massively tapped into before.
Absolutely.
It was really eye-opening.
I can imagine. That's really interesting stuff. And in terms of the sort of the rowing itself, from a psychological point of view, you're there and you're sort of competing. And what's it like mentally when you're on a boat, Jess? You're so focused on what you're doing, and sort of just for our listeners who may have not had the opportunity to row, or may never get the opportunity to row at the level you do, but sort of tell us what it's like to be in a sort of really strong field to compete.
I think you obviously have silly thoughts that come into your brain. On the outside you probably look so focused and bulletproof, but on the inside you're having all these silly thoughts. So we all laugh about them together. I could just jump out the boat here and walk back.
And they don't want to do that.
But if you seriously think about it, you're no, there's nothing I'd rather do right now. If someone came along and told me to get out the boat, I'd be distraught. So it's just allowing those thoughts to pass through and have a little chuckle about them, and then get back on to focusing on your breathing and what you're going to do, making sure you're thinking about your first stroke, and that sets up the rest of them, and staying in the boat, not thinking about the result at the finish line, because there's no point. You need to think about how you're going to get your boat down the course to the finish line. And just like, yeah, I think your mental space is affected a lot by your preparation, but no matter how bad a preparation I've had some years, like, you're still super competitive and really approach it in exactly the same way and have confidence in yourself.
Absolutely, yeah. No,
yeah.
And what about the challenges that you've had in your sort of career thus far? What would you say some of the challenges have been for you, Jess?
I think so we have to be centralised just outside of Reading. So if you get on the team, this is where you have to live your life. So I had to move away from my family in the north. So I think like balancing family and commitments to rowing, because obviously you have to miss quite a lot of things, and balancing. I came straight out of sixth form and came onto the team. So I've been getting my engineering degree alongside. So balancing that and, you know, just making sure that you've got a good balance of life and rowing, and you're taking care of yourself as well in your relationships down here. So yeah, I think just making sure that you're not doing too much of one thing and too little of others.
That's an interesting choice, engineering, in terms of many athletes might sort of choose sports people a career in sport. Is there any reason that you sort of engineering was something that you've been interested in, or?
Yeah, I've always loved it. I've always wanted to be a structural engineer ever since I was little. I just really love the physics and the maths, and also like it is like a lot to do with sport, like the teamwork and the getting the most out of your team and working out what everyone needs to do to get the project to the finish line. And I also really love the physics of rowing, because it's not just the strongest, fastest, fittest people, because you've got to somehow get that transferred to the water. So it's also skillful, even though it's the same thing again and again and again. You're working with a fluid that, you know, you have to try and make it propel you forward yourself.
Definitely.
So yeah.
So it sounds like you might be a coach sometime. By way, is that something you'd ever consider doing, just going into coaching, or?
So I'm using the rest of my summer now I'm gonna like get my coaching qualification, and definitely I'm gonna also mentor people, and I'm interested in it, so I'm getting that this summer.
Brilliant, no, good for you, brilliant. That's great stuff. And speaking of that, what about your aspirations as a competitor? I mean, where do you see yourself from where you are, Jess? What's sort of coming up for you? What's your vision going forward? I mean, obviously share only as much as you're sort of comfortable sharing that. You've got your own sort of personal goals, but in a nutshell, where do you sort of see yourself going forward? What's your vision?
Absolutely. I really want to set up the next Olympiad in a place where I feel happy and I'm getting the most out of the team around me, and it's working for me a bit more, because I think it's easy to lose yourself in a system. So I just really want to like ground myself in a place and work on my weaknesses and get whatever I can out of my body going forward for the next 3 years, but also like balance that with, you know, getting some engineering work experience and still building up my life away from rowing. So I'm like balanced and grounded and not stuck with anything. So I'm really looking forward to carving out what I need for myself going forward.
And absolutely. And in terms of sort of like funding and sponsorship, and how does that work, just to compete in what you do?
So we get funded by UK Sport, and that's based on performance. But I am really looking for some help with sponsorship to get my own single scull, because I really need that to go forward, and that's kind of what I want to make my project going forward. So it's really exciting for me, and if anyone could help out, absolutely, really love to work with them.
And is there any way they can sort of, if anyone's listening, sort of thinking, they'd like to sort of get involved, in sort of helping you with the single scull, where's the best place to get in touch with you? Is it sort of LinkedIn, or is there any way they can...
Yeah, LinkedIn would be awesome. It's just my name, Jess Leyden. I'm on there. Got a picture of me in my rowing kit.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. No, for sure. And obviously that's sort of, helping you move forward. I mean, one thing's for sure, rowing's got a very strong tradition in the UK. It's always been, relatively strong and a strong field, and has traditionally done well in the Olympics and World Championships. That's for sure. And certainly I'm sure a lot of listeners have sort of, if not sort of watched it all year round, at least tuned in the major tournaments and the Olympics and so on and so forth. That's for sure. Or maybe they just sort of their local club, or they sort of probably watch the rowers compete there as well. But from that point of view, if there's anyone sort of looking to get into rowing, I know it's outside your remit in one respect, but just as a general rule, what can someone do if there's any sort of young, or any of any age really, listeners looking to maybe get involved in rowing, Jess? Is there any sort of way they can do that, or?
Yeah, definitely. So you can go on the British Rowing website, and you can find the closest club to you. So just have a search on there and enter like your postcode or something, and it'll tell you what the closest club to you is. And then I just suggest, giving them a call, or like going down and having a chat to people down there. People really want to help you out and get you involved, because there's a lot of people need to make a boat go, so they're always looking for a spare body to help them get on the water with them and in a crew. So yeah, it's really nice sport. Absolutely.
And is that like for all levels? Yes, people of all levels can get down and have a go, or?
Yeah, 100%. We all need to start somewhere, so yeah, everyone's definitely willing to help out and get you out in a boat.
Brilliant. No, that's great, Jess. I really appreciate your time. Our listeners have found that really interesting. We wish you every success in your future career. I'm sure there's plenty more to come from yourself. So I really want to thank you for coming aboard the show, Jess. That was Jess Leyden on Salford City Radio, the Friday Sports Show, 94.4 FM. Your host, Jimmy Petruzzi. Jess Leyden, full-time athlete at British Rowing, who was kind enough to join us and give an insight into her career and what it's like to be a rower, all things rowing. So thanks to Jess, and thanks for listening.